Okay, this coming session is on archetypes. So Thea and David are on the show, who I've known for quite a while. They're very experienced coaches, and we really have quite an embodiment geek out. I think it's a really good introduction to the idea of archetypes, but it's also just about what makes coaching work and embodiment work. So very easeful flowing conversation, I think, because I knew them quite well. So enjoy. Okay, on the show today, leadership coaches Thea Crockett and David Brown, people I know quite well. And we're going to likely talking about archetypes today. So, guys, welcome.
Hi.
Thanks,
Lovely
Mark.
to be here.
Let's hear a little bit about your story, where you came from, what got you interested in archetypes. Let's go Thea, then David.
Okay. I had a history in managing organizations and found I was, as a leader myself, I was good, but very burnt out and very isolated in my personal life. And so found some other things that really worked for me, like learning that I could create my own reality. And that was a very imaginative process as I first learned it. And then I realized I needed the body to be much more a part of that. So came to you, Mark, to learn with the Embodied Facilitators course, which was amazing, at which point I met David and our fabulous part in the show of doing the Muppets as part of the Untalent show on that. And that built up a really good friendship. And then when we started doing the Embodiment Circles through COVID, it was David really started with the archetypes, but we started to collaborate very quickly on them.
So the circles were the free online groups for people listening who might not know that we launched during COVID to try and keep everyone a bit saner.
Yeah, they were wonderful, and they were a brilliant structure to support people and a really great structure for us to explore this new idea. And we found it worked really, really well. It's very simple for people. It's deep and wide-ranging.
We'll get into the idea in a minute. David, okay. What about you? Tell us a little bit how your story kind of led to what you do now.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Thea's enthusiasm bubbling through there. I got into martial arts when I was a teenager and absolutely loved it. And I loved the self-development part of martial arts. And then to kind of take that further, then I started getting into coaching, and I started doing my coach training with the Coactive Training Institute. And one of the teachers on that, a wonderful guy called Anthony Parry, who did the EFC, the Embodied Facilitators course with you, Mark, said, you really need to learn about Mark Walsh. You need to get onto the Embodied Facilitators course so that I could find a way of bringing the martial arts skills that I'd learned into coaching.
Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did that. And then as part of the exam for EFC, I remember where I was when I came up with the idea, just this idea of using the archetypes and embodying the archetypes came to me then.
So David, just for the listeners again, so EFC is the Embodied Facilitator course. That's kind of a year-long training. We used to do live. It's pretty much been replaced with KEC now, the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching. So if you hear these guys talk about EFC or KEC, this is what they're talking about. They study with me. So amongst us, these what are they called when you have letters? Acronyms make sense, but just for the listeners, yeah. So yeah. And in it, we ask people to do an exam where they have to present something, and you chose archetypes, right?
I did, and I loved it. And the reason I chose, well, I've always had a thing about, mythology and storytelling and the hero's journey and all of that sort of stuff. So it really fitted with the things that I was passionate about. And then, as Thea said, when we did the Embodiment Circles as part of the pandemic, that opportunity just came, and Thea jumped on board along with another one of our EFC graduates, but I won't name her because she may not want to be named.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So let's start with what are archetypes, and because this is a word you hear sort of thrown about. Jung came up with it originally, I believe. It's kind of in the lexicon now. Like someone will say, oh, that's archetypal. I'm not sure it's very well defined generally. How do you guys generally define it?
I would define it as patterns of behavior and thinking and being that appear across cultures and throughout time.
Okay, so you had this idea of like the collective unconscious, that there was, sometimes this has almost like a mystical feel. Some people, I've even heard it described that as genetics, sort of everywhere along that spectrum I've heard it described. But there's some sort of models, some sort of maps that crop up again and again and again. So you can read a book from Japan from the 5th century and it still sort of makes sense. Yeah. Or Shakespeare resonates with people in Korea or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I'd say the archetypes brings it's like each archetype is a focal point for a set of ideas, behaviors, possibilities that resonate with people, with most people. You can't say all by any means, but with many, many people as a model to aspire to or to recognize yourself within.
So a resonant model. And in terms of studying them, is the idea, okay, if we study them, I mean, it's just sort of cool and interesting, right? It's cool to see the hero's journey pop up in different cultures or whatever. What would be the point in studying them, though? Like, what would people gain from that?
I don't really study the archetypes because the approach that we've used has always been an embodied one, where we embody the archetypes and then from that, let the body tell us the qualities that are available to us. So personally, I've actually done very little studying of the archetypes. I'm not honestly all that interested.
Some people are really geeky about it, I've noticed. Some people are really into it and they get very insistent. Have you come across the sort of young police?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, some people struggle with our approach because it's very fluid, it's very loose, and it's very personal. Uh-huh. And yes, we do come across, but that's not warrior. That's
But people have got a set view of what it is because they read a book from some Swiss guy from the turn of the century. And David, they're using men's work a lot as well, aren't they? Like I've come across the sort of the classic, and there's a lot of models of archetypes, right? There'll be some with 12. I came across one, the Jungian ones seem almost infinite. But then the sort of classic 4 archetype model is used a lot in men's work. I think that's one of the first places I came across it.
Yeah, King, Warrior, Lover, Magician from Gillette and Moore, Douglas Jeanette and someone more. Very, very, very common. And then there's a lot of stuff about that it's exclusively men's work, which we hold much more to this idea of, well, we don't use the word king, we use the word sovereign. And then that way it kind of loosens that gender specificity that people get a little bit hooked up on.
Right.
But, if you're embodying it and you're a woman, then, or you identify as a woman, then it's going to have feminine qualities, right? But you can also work on the masculine qualities too. So we tried to avoid getting hooked up on that.
And the whole point is they're cross-cultural as well, right? So I remember, I'm from an Irish Republican family. And the first time I heard monarch, like my instinctive sort of culture reaction was like, fuck you, And so it's like, okay, but there is a quality of sovereignty, right? Like, or lover, I've seen people get caught with. They think, does that mean I have to be like in Romeo and Juliet or something? So it's almost like you're looking for ways around the cultural associations to get under sort of what's underneath that. Is that fair?
I think so, yeah, because what I love about our work is how personal we make it. So we use archetypes to give people some stretch in their behavior, in qualities they want to adopt and reach for more. But we do have some standards within that, some guidelines, some sense of what sovereign is, what warrior is, what magician is, what lover is. And we do work primarily with those 4. Mm-hmm. But we also have a big focus on what's the experience of that in your own body. And therefore, what's your version of that? And for example, I had one client who sovereign wasn't doing it for her, but what had those qualities of stillness and awareness and decision making was actually more a monk. So she embodied a monk-like quality because that's what worked for her at that time.
Uh-huh.
We have that flexibility in it.
I guess the key thing there, in terms of back to the why, is you're helping people. We always talk about awareness, range, and choice on the courses you've done with me, right? That they're becoming aware of what they already embody. So it's like, okay, Mark, your default is warrior. That's great. That might be good. You could brand around that. You could, set up your dating profile based to reflect that reality. There's so many things you could do around it, but also you might want to be careful. You might want to, here are some of the pitfalls. And also you might also want to build range with some of these other aspects. So that's the basic model you're using, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. And what I love about being able to embody it is that my experience of it is that it's almost like it activates that part of me that perhaps feels unfamiliar. And so therefore it gives me that awareness to be able to then explore it and go into it in more depth and play with it.
Well, in terms of I use we're using Body Toolkit, which has 26 poses that are kind of archetypal. So there's a lot of crossover here. One, as soon as you put someone in a pose which is kind of archetypal, and there are such things, I always say, is if you look at good art, you know what it's trying to convey. That's a Japanese warrior or that's a Japanese lover. I've got my Mary statue up there. She's in a certain pose. It's good advertising is the same thing. So we know that these work across cultures. But by putting people in them as best they can, it confronts their pattern. Is this familiar or is it not? And the second one is it creates a very concrete how to shift. Because it's like you could talk about archetypes all day and read all these clever books on it, but that's not actually very helpful for most people, right?
Yeah, and the experience of it is instant. Like you've experienced, we've experienced that in the Embodied Toolkit. You get that sense of, like with sovereign, we often say, like, we have a sovereign stance, and then we add the imagination of imagine a cloak, imagine a crown, and it's incredible the impact that has on people. And sometimes it's a bit too much. Like you have to let people find their own way there sometimes, but it's incredible the lift people get. That sense of presence increases, and it's very instant, and it gives them something to practice daily to get those new habits.
It's amazing what shifts people, because some people just move the posture, so right, stand like this, and a lot of people that's enough. Other people, they sort of do it and they don't really do it. It's like they don't actually hit the button because the body just points them in a direction. I hate to use the word energy, but it's like pointing them towards energy, pointing them towards an archetype, pointing towards an essence, we might say. And then other people, you have to go, right, but imagine this. Or you use an object, like when I've been trying to get into sort of parenting kind of archetypes, they give people a pillow and they just immediately go into this kind of care role. Or for warrior, you give them a stick. You see what happens to every fucking 5-year-old child when they pick up a stick and it's a sword. It's like, okay, you're in warrior mode now. Try taking that stick off them. Good luck with that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so there's ways as coaches we activate these modes, right? Embodiment's a great one.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, it's such so. And do you know what I was thinking? I was thinking about this interview, and I was actually thinking of the Embodied Toolkit, and I had a sense of connection. I thought that it's been so exciting to uncover and to keep uncovering what these archetypes offer people and us through now a 3-year journey, David? It's been about 3 years that we've been exploring this, and it made me think of you and the Embodied Toolkit and how exciting it must be to keep working with those poses, keep finding new depths in them, new points of information. And that's the feeling I've had working in the archetypes, because it's so simple. It offers a very wide range, I think.
And there is this tension, as you say, isn't there, between, on the one hand, letting it be organic and self-created and personalized, but on the other hand, not letting people go, oh, this is my warrior, hi. And you're like, no, fuck that. That's not warrior. I don't know what that is, but it's not warrior. And your warrior might be different than mine, and there might be some cultural piece, and maybe we call it fierceness instead of warrior because you've got a bad traumatic association with something or whatever. But there's also this other element, as well as the sort of bottom-up personalized element. There is also this element of going, yeah, I want to stretch you. Or actually, that's not archetypal. No one's going to look at that. You know, if you were doing a Gillette advert and you needed a warrior archetype to be matching, like, hey, by Gillette, it's warrior-like. You know, like you wouldn't have someone in lover pose. It just wouldn't fit the advert. It wouldn't fit what you want to convey. So there's an interesting tension between these two sides, I think.
Yeah, and I think there is a book that's been written on archetypes and advertising and marketing, and you know, there's a whole study of that I haven't looked into it, but yeah, clearly it really works so that people identify with it.
I mean, I think of it in terms of, I mean, whoever wrote that book obviously should be taken out the back and shot against the wall for kind of misuse of beautiful work for humanity. However, I do think there's something in sort of branding, like knowing your personal brand. You can't really be, like, if we go with the big four, just to use that model, right? You can't really be more than a couple of them in your brand. You can try, but then it's just everything, which is nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, do you want to be more magician? Or I quite like, sometimes I hear Joker in that role in the four. That's a different version. Yeah. It's like trying to be Joker and Monarch at the same time. Maybe, but good luck with that. Like, you kind of have to choose, you know, like in our brand, we kind of have Warrior and Joker as kind of two central things. You know, it's like, it's pragmatic, it's no nonsense, but there's going to be dick jokes. And like, that is very different than, say, I don't know, Wendy Palmer, late great Wendy Palmer. Her brand was very much more regal. You know, she's like, be noble, be shiny, be awesome. You know, she had that kind of much more kind of queenly kind of embodiment.
Yeah.
And I think her brand rightly reflected that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like that wasn't misleading when you saw that on her website.
Yeah, one of the, you know, I think let's give a bit of a big up from Embodiment Unlimited. We've learned really well from you guys how to work with embodiment, and that's what we learned through the elements, through the embodied toolkit. You have to give people something to work with where there's resistance. Like, there has to be some sort of like, you can have your own relationship with warrior, but actually if it's turning up a bit flaccid, try this. Have a go at putting a bit more oomph into it. Sorry.
They're almost provocations, is how I feel. When you put someone in an embodiment that's unfamiliar to them, it's not necessarily antagonizing. Sometimes people hate it, but it in some way is a provocation or an evocation as well, right? It's like it calls something forth, or it just rubs them up the wrong way. Like, one of those things happen.
Air used to do that for me when we were working with the elements. Yeah.
Right.
I knew I had to work with it. I didn't want this to be unexpressed in me. And so I worked with it. And I think that's what we can give people. I love evocation, by the way. That's brilliant.
I think it's both. It's a provocation because it's a poke on one level, and it's a sort of calling forth seduction on another with any kind of pose that's unfamiliar. And we have to take stances or movements, you can do either, right, that are a bit different, because our normal life, we're not an archetype. I mean, imagine if I was like, unless you're Freddie Mercury at Wembley, which is, I think, a great study in archetypes, monarch, warrior, lover. I mean, you've got fucking everything there. And he does these big gestures. Podcast listeners can't see.
Chest out.
Yeah, chest this, and then wide stances. Because he's at Wembley and he's got 50,000 people and he's a little dot, and, you know, he has to be big, you know. But unless you're Freddie Mercury at Wembley, most of us can't sustain that. Even Freddie Mercury couldn't sustain that, you know, for a long time. You know, he's quite chilled out if you see him in interviews. It's something much bigger than how we normally are in life, isn't it? It's something grander. It's something that is provocative in that way, because we wouldn't normally walk like a warrior or a lover 100%, even if we were like a little bit like that.
And what I loved about martial arts, or what I love about martial arts, is that it allows you to really explore that warrior, fiery, you know, and take it to quite an extreme in some way. And I remember, you know, as part of the training with you, like really exploring fire from that more sort of passionate, sensual perspective was a real kind of eye opener for me, and opened up a whole different aspect of fire, but in this, I'd say lover, in our model, that was incredibly exciting and very challenging and confronting.
Yeah, and it's like everyone talks a good talk, but can you, let's say we're doing warrior kind of energy, right? Like everyone talks a good talk, but how is it to do like screaming bokken cuts with a really, intense practice? Or, let's say we're doing something much more like sensual massage or silly, crazy dancing to the Muppet Show. It's like, again, everyone can talk a good talk. So yes, I'm very playful. But it's like, can they actually do the playful when we're doing, a 1 hour kitten game where everyone's rolling? You've done this with me, haven't you? Everyone's rolling around on the floor being kittens. Yeah. It's kind of like Fred Donaldson kind of work for those that know him. And it's like, okay, let's see if you really are playful, or if after 10 minutes you suddenly need the toilet and don't come back,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that sense of really putting people in it is really great. And I think that's what longer programs are really great for as well, and in-person work. I think it's just great to have those like, are you really up for this? And find out, because if you're gaily going around going, yeah, I've got the warrior, or I can do the silliness. Well, really? Let's find out. And when it's just like that, like for me, like, there were aspects of that vulnerability when I was really learning embodiment, like the sinking into cuddle puddles for ages. Like, wow.
Picture of you guys in a cuddle puddle. See that classic photo? It's a classic photo. We can't do that with the online trainings, unfortunately. But what we found is the sweet spot now, because we went from in-person intensives to just online during COVID. And now we do online, which spreads out the learning, because with archetypes or anything else, people can only learn a little bit, can't they? Like, you have to calibrate it. I'm sure you guys work with not too much, not too little. And you can only like drip feed it and practice over time. And online's way better than that, than doing a 5-day intensive in the Kent countryside or something, But then it loses that like deep, immersive, intense experience. So I encourage all the students now to come to a live event. And that's been our that's our latest version at solving the unsolvable problem of in person. Because what used to happen when you guys in the EFC days, people would come, go on these deep experiences and get utterly overwhelmed. Do you remember like the day after the samurai game or something like that? People would just like,
God.
Like, it's too much. Like people just can only absorb so much of this archetypal strong work in a short space of time.
Especially when I spent most of that dead.
You're most of that dead. You might want to explain that one to people. But it's So the samurai game is a game where you take on being samurai clans in a simulated, sort of very archetypal from a warrior point of view. A couple of other archetypes in there, but that's the main one. I don't want to say too much about it because it's a kind of private thing and it's usually not advertised too much. But you can spend quite a lot of the day lying down dead, can't you, Thea? That's quite possible.
and if you want to be in it, you've got to be dead. Like, not lifting your head up to check out what's going on. It's had its own challenge that I actually really appreciated in the end. It's a great thing to do. If anyone gets the opportunity, I would highly recommend it from a good practice.
Various. Lance Giroux out of California, I think, is holding that now from George Leonard's invention originally. And Lance Giroux's holding the kind of lineage of it, I think, so people could look that up if they're interested. Certainly I've done it in Russia, I've done it in the UK at least 5 or 6 times. It's one of the more immersive and interesting. I'd say fully goes into that warrior archetype, doesn't it? It fully goes into it, which it's interesting. We played it in, it was invented in California as a way to understand peace and war. And it's it's what's needed for Northern Californians. Interestingly, we played it in Russia and it was just easy for everyone. We're like, right, you have to not smile. They were like, yes. And we ended up doing a whole nother game that was all about like sensuality and openness and lover that we had to invent because it was actually more what was needed, like archetypally in that culture. Do you find sort of cultural factors here? I know like your students are pretty international, I'm guessing. So do you sort of see you know, like the Brazilians can do the lover a bit better, or so, you know, I mean, just like Ethiopians have this wonderful sort of monastic kind of regal bearing. Do you see any of those factors?
Yeah, certainly. I've worked with people where, like, say, for like somebody from Argentina, who sovereign was actually much more for her like a gypsy. So there was this element of, you know, dance and that kind of freedom of being sovereign and not being caught up in a kingdom, but being open more to the world. And that was a real eye opener for me. But that very much came up spontaneously, and clearly a cultural thing for her because of her upbringing and her parents, you know, the way she was parented. It was wonderful.
I can imagine Argentinians being quite sovereign as well. That's what the rest of South America pisses off the rest of South America.
Yeah.
Got that slight, I am from Buenos Aires. You know, that kind of pride that's there.
And watching people in a group when there's somebody who really gets it, you can see the sense of people both going, I can't quite do that, but also, but I aspire to doing that. And when they start to progress in some of those qualities, for example, women maybe in societies or in family backgrounds where they don't have much of a voice, but then they do start to embody their authentic self-leadership and their right to a presence, and it's so exciting. And the, you know, the doors that open as a result are beautiful, magnificent.
In terms of benefits, then, I mean, obviously, it kind of almost could be anything, right? Because it's like, if what you're doing is not working and you're stuck in one or two of the archetypes, then doing the other archetypes will probably help better. You know, like it will probably add something. So we could say on the one hand, it's useful for pretty much anything because it just opens your behavioral range, right?
Mm-hmm.
But given that, though, are there specific things like, you know, the confidence building I could really see with like the monarch and the warrior, or, you know, people that have just taken life a bit seriously and they bring in a bit of kind of playful energy again? Like, what are some of the main like problems you solve, as it were? And I remember David talking to you about the marketing of this and going, it's actually quite tricky, isn't it? Because there isn't like one problem that gets solved.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like speaking from my personal experience rather than talking about anybody else. For me, the whole idea for me has been around wholeness and presence. So being able to take the time to feel into my body and like for reasons that I don't need to go into today, but I kind of really lost a lot of awareness and presence in the left side of my body when I was much, much younger, and carried that into my adulthood. And what with other embodiment practices, but what the archetypes have really done for me is to begin to allow that awareness to really spread right across my body and give me that kind of nuance and awareness, so that I walk through life like I can walk down the street and I just feel so alive and so present and so receptive and open to the world in a really delicious, exciting and wonderful way. And that's just such a new experience for me. So there's a sense of aliveness that comes with that for me that I just find wonderful, really, really wonderful as an example.
Right. So there's the presence, generally aliveness. I'm hearing something like wholeness there as well, right? Like there's a integration of parts. There's a wholeness.
Yeah.
It makes total sense. Makes total sense. Are there sort of specific kind of like client issues you feel like are well addressed through for archetypal work? Either of you?
I think that it all comes together in sovereign. So for people's self-leadership and their leadership in the world, sovereign is such a great archetype to bring it all together, because the other archetypes are like, you can almost see them as advisors or parts of the sovereign, but the sovereign brings the all together. And so what I think I experience with clients in particular is having that ability to step into sovereign in any one moment. Almost everything becomes available then. So if we're talking about leadership, Like my sovereign, I'm a pretty easily step into sovereign. I'm a bit of a bolshy one. And but when I bring lover in as well, that's when my sovereign actually becomes really powerful, is because I'm not pushing and I'm not enforcing. There's a softer edge to me that people respond much, much better to than the way I used to lead, which was a bit more forceful and yeah.
It balances out a tendency, right? It softens an edge, it balances a tendency. Yeah, I push back a little bit on your clear sovereign bias there, but monkeys think that climbing trees is important. I understand.
Yeah, I get that. And but it's like, well, I mean, any situation really, you can, if somebody's struggling with something, I don't think I've found anything that I couldn't use the archetypes to work with.
So a couple of examples, like, because you can use it for state changing, more like long-term stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Communication, listening,
communication stuff, like communication styles.
Yeah, being with people, empathy, compassion, and then there's the sort of the lead, like you saying, the leadership thing, about using the warrior and being more focused and committed and fierce about stuff. So yes, sovereign can take a stand for things, but warrior needs to come in sometimes and be more fierce about that. Sovereign and magician, again, this is really sort of Thea's real beautiful speciality around creating and using sovereign and magician in relationship for that more embodied creating. But I'll let Thea speak to that.
Yeah, I find what I love with magician is as an access point for intuition and imagination, which is often really missing for people. And magician seems to give an entry point to open up that part of people's relationship with life to get more expansive and more creative around their problem solving or their approaches. And also, some things I like is sometimes, like you said about your Irish background and Monarch's going to get set up as a no, thank you very much. But I think there was somebody we worked with once and we said, well, how about the rebel? Like, you might need to find a bit of rebellion in here because there was a bit of yesing going on, and to embody the rebel archetype. So little part players come in as they're needed as well to solve particular issues, and they usually just pop up as needed.
Yeah, like, and often they're offshoots or subdivisions of other ones, right? Like, okay, this is Destroyer, really interesting one to play with. It's not the same as a warrior, but they're cousins. Like it's like, okay, let's play with this for a little bit as opposed to
and you can go, and I think that's why there are so many archetypes, right? Is that you can kind of get really broad with it, whereas I think our preference has been to let's stick with 4 and then let's go really deep into each of those 4, and then within those 4 you're going to find all kinds of nuances that are going to fit to you because of your culture or your personality or your preferences and all of those sorts of things. So there is that freedom to get more specific and more nuanced with that.
Yeah, if you're not holding the map too rigidly, right? And I feel like a map needs enough variety that it can just stimulate different things, not for different possibilities. That's all it really needs, and not so much variety that you're just lost and you're going, okay, what was that again? Was that a 7.2 blue 5? Stuff can get just way too complex, and any map's a simplification. So I find students always push back against maps. They'll go, but I'm not the 4 elements, there's a 5th one, or it depends. And I'm like, it's just a map, guys. It has to be more simple than reality by definition. By definition, it's just a way of thinking, it's a way of playing. And if it's not useful, we let go of it.
And I'd like to push back a little bit on your thing about sovereign, in the sense that a sovereign historically, archetypally, would have been a warrior, and he would have been a lover, and he would have had that creativity and that visioning that's really important and the learning.
But you could argue that for many archetypes. You can argue that. You could say, well, warriors also make great lovers, and you have to be sovereign, in charge of yourself if you're a warrior. And like you could say any of them you've just made one the boss, because it's like the boss archetype, right? And you've taken one and put it above the others, and I don't agree with that.
No, I wouldn't say we've put it above. We have put it in the center.
Right, you put it in the center. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like a drawing in point for all of them. But I would also say it's really true that that's maybe one of the complexities of working with the archetypes, is that they all do everything if they're doing it wholly.
Right. I mean, wholeness is the one in the center, I would say, but it, or else it's not an archetype. Archetype's an aspect of wholeness, right? It's got to be it's a face of it. But as you say, my sense is that like any one done perfectly would be all the others simultaneously and wholeness, or like that yin yang symbol where one creates the other and contains the other. And anyway, it all gets a bit theoretical if we kind of get on that road.
Yes.
But what about the emotional side of things? I know you guys work with the emotions quite a bit. How does that relate?
For me, I think the archetypes give access to different emotional ranges than people might be aware of. So, I mean, we quite often experience like that sense of an unseen anger coming up when somebody tries to embody or starts to embody an aspect that maybe they've denied in themselves, or they haven't given much space to, and there's a sense of maybe loss or anger that comes up in recognition of having missed out on that. Dealing with the emotions, I don't know, maybe actually I do it so inherently that I don't really know how to talk about it. I
don't necessarily think of it as a separate thing. It's just throughout the process. Yeah.
I think that's part of also the way David and I work together is we often see things cropping up that the other one hasn't noticed, maybe because they're in the facilitation role or they're holding the space, and then the other one's available to go, this can access a certain emotion much better, or they see it happening in one of the people in the group, for example, to be able to pick up on. So it's one of the great benefits of working in a partnership.
Mm-hmm. Partnership works interesting, isn't it? Like we always taught EFC with two people, me and Frank here, or me and Christina, I teach Keck with now. And it's very interesting working in pairs, because there's certain things that are more difficult, certain things that are easier, better. Obviously, in terms of like archetypes and stuff, often there's a bit of balance is usually pretty helpful. Like me and Steve have to be a bit careful when we work together, because we've got so much joker between us that one of us has to fucking turn it off, But just for the good of the sanity of everyone. How do you find paired work? Anything you want to say about
that? Well, the relationship has evolved very organically, and it just seems that we really beautifully gel with each other. And I know that, like, one of the things that I really appreciate about Thea is her ability to be so creative and imaginative, whereas that's something that I feel less comfortable with. It's not something that I access quite as freely or as easily as she does. So that's been incredibly useful in lots of different situations, particularly when I come in and I feel a bit stuck and I feel a bit locked in, because I can be quite earthy in that respect and find it hard to break out of that.
I think that any typology at a deeper level, any typology is useful for relationships, because whether it's in a pair or a team, because we stop seeing other people as broken versions of ourselves and start saying what you just said there, David, was like, oh, she has this capacity, which is really cool, that I don't have so easily, and rather than, why isn't she like me? Right? I feel like everyone in the world should learn at least one typology, like 4 elements or 4 archetypes. It almost doesn't matter which one, but if they learn one, then they can make this shift into saying, okay, there are different types of people, which sounds obvious, but it's not obvious to most people. Most people, I think, shrink back to, why isn't everyone like me?
Yeah. It's I think it's one of the things that we learn to value very quickly when well, certainly I did when I started working with more awareness in my life about my own habits and patterns and other people. And for me, working with David, I get this sense of he really holds a steady build of things where I might start boinging around. He's like, there's a feeling of growth that I'm not used to, that I find so valuable and exciting and enriching, because we just keep building on what we've done before. And he's really great at holding that steady pace for our model to grow and our impact to grow.
This could be nice in couples work as well, right? Have you had couples on your courses? I find it fascinating because you often see polarity, and then you either see outsourcing or competition for an archetype. So it would be outsourcing, be like, oh, he's the warrior one, I'm the love one. And then he gets more and more warrior-like, and she gets more and more love-like, and they both atrophy till they get divorced and have to switch and have to make up for it. They go, oh, I'm divorced now, I have to learn this other thing. Or there's a competition for it. Like, well, I want to be warrior-like. And it's like, well, yeah, but not with him, because he's more warrior-like. There's that sort of jostling for the position. All this complementarity, right? Which is like, hey, we're complementary, but maybe we can switch on some days. There's, flexibility to it rather than being stuck in a role. It seems the more mature version when there's complementarity, but an ability to kind of change a little bit. And there's a few dynamics that happen in couples, right? I mean, do you see any of those with married couples on workshops or anything?
We haven't had many, have we? We haven't really had many. It would be a really interesting area of work. I'd love to explore that, because it's so, what you're saying is spot on. I see it in my own relationship. I see when I'm seeding some of those qualities to Thurston, and when I'm grabbing them for myself and running with it. But also when I'm going, actually, I need to tone that down a little bit to give him space to explore that aspect of himself. It is a constantly moving feast, and it takes a lot of awareness.
Sorry, the time I most saw it was I used to do workshops with loads of lesbians in Moscow, and I really saw a polarity because everyone was a woman. There'd be 30 people in the room, all women, but a lot of them were couples. A lot of them came in pairs, and I really, really saw some of the polarity stuff then. Because I was like, because gender was out of the picture. It's like, okay, everyone's Russian, so culture is out of the picture. Everyone's a woman, so gender's out of the picture. So what we're just left with personality type. So it was even more clear to me, some of those dynamics working with gay women.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah,
brilliant.
It's pictures of me with 30 Russian lesbians.
Also good.
Some good friends. If you're out there, hello, Julie. If you're out there listening. Okay. So, David, I saw in the thing you sent me about your CV a lot about sort of inner, like how people think, how people talk to themselves. Does that relate to our themes, or is that more like a separate piece of work? Kind of talking to oneself more kindly, I think, is one of your specialisms. If I read that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think back to, so for me, this links into things like shadow work and being able to take a more honest and open look at your patterns, so that you can, so for example, not to get too technical about in the archetype models that there are out there, but there's this idea, for example, with sovereign, of this idea of the weakling and the tyrant.
Right.
So if you're not really embodying that mature sovereignty in yourself, then you can drop into this polarity of weakling and tyrant, where, yes, you end up talking unkindly to other people, but you're also talking very unkindly to yourself.
And we tend to see that, right? Like people practice usually one embodiment internally and externally, because it's one embodiment for both, right? There's no separate embodiment that creates the thoughts internally compared to the outside language.
Exactly.
And when I've done a lot of work with anger management with people, and all the angry people, every single one of them I've worked with, usually it was like corporate clients who drew me in, every single one of them really harsh self-talk, really harsh. Yeah.
So so my particular pattern is around this kind of more harsh, very, very self-critical, and kind of going on that sort of self-forgiveness journey of being able to talk much more lovingly and kindly to myself. Feels like it's been a real great internal journey around sovereign and lover, because there's sort of self-care that gets involved and incorporated into that. So trying to encourage my clients to be much more caring towards themselves, talk much more kindly towards themselves. And for me, that begins to open up a really nice door into being able to look at our patterns that don't serve us so much and not be critical of them.
Not be too harsh. I'm such a warrior, it's so awful that it doesn't really help, does it?
But like what you've talked about in the sort of the trauma courses of no, this has served you and this has played a part in your development and it's got you this far, and now it's time to upgrade that and to think maybe slightly differently and to keep that in balance. And that's just been hugely beneficial for me personally. But now I start to use it a lot more with my clients, and it's transformational work.
The Gabor Mate move, isn't it? It's we're three fairly senior coaches here, right? We've been doing this, I think, all 20 years plus, I think, right? Like a while. All three of us been doing this a while. And what I'm sometimes shocked by is often sort of like how simple it comes back to, just like encouraging people to be kind to themselves and stuff. Like I did a post yesterday on Facebook saying, who needs some encouragement? And like 50 people answered it, just like people just dying for a kind word to get them through the day. And I knew some of those people. They're not like pathetic people. They're kick-ass people that do all cool stuff in the world. But people just need like a bit of encouragement to be kind to themselves, or, you know what I mean? Like a little nudge, a little practice that helps them build 1% more warrior. It's not rocket science, really.
Yeah. And then also what I noticed then is that, when you do that shadow work, when I've done that shadow work, it's that changing the belief system that sits underneath so much of that harshness, so that for example, feeling like you're good enough, and working with that belief system in a way that means that it makes it much easier for you to get out there in the world and be open to failure and rejection and all of those things that a lot of people are really afraid of. And to be able to, do their work in the world, and be open to that kind of exposure and visibility.
Yeah. So you're trying to speak there. This might well be a kind of closing comment. Anything you want to add to all this?
Oh. Yeah, it's the simplicity that I love in any. And I think that's what we come down to with a bit of experience in coaching, isn't it? You start and you're like grabbing everything and oh, that's interesting and I want to follow that. And actually, as you mature as a coach, I find the simpler the model, the more impact it has and the more deeply I can apply it with clients. And so, and like that, like you said, that 1% more, like being able to work with people and say, well, just go for another %, just go for another, and then maybe you'll be ready for another % and then you'll be ready for 5%. And that way people change actually really quite effortlessly, I think. It's also a good, it's very important for me as a coach to have a coach, because I go through this stuff as well. And I need pulling up occasionally and having a kind word said to me, or a reminder to be a bit more holistic with myself.
Having lunch, who's a real master coach yesterday, a local friend, and I said, do you want to sit down and work with me on this, for a bit? And it's like, she just, you can't coach yourself, right? So it was like, she just needed someone to ask her the sort of basic coaching questions that she learned 20 years ago, but you can't do it for yourself.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, we need to wrap up. So nice geek out. Appreciate that. Where do people find you? Where do people want to go on one of your Archetypes courses? They want to learn a bit more. Where do they go?
So we have a Facebook group, which is the Archetypes Academy, and people can join that Facebook group. And at the moment, we're promoting all of our stuff. So free stuff and our paid courses on that Facebook group.
Probably on the app, Embodiment app as well, I imagine. I saw an archetype group in German on there as well for our German listeners. It's not with these guys, but with someone else in German. Thea, any other websites to check out?
Yes, I'm on WordPress as Thea Allison to find me. Basically though, I think the important point is that Archetypes Academy for this work, because that's where we put everything. We do a lot of videos that then go onto YouTube, and they're all linked to the Facebook group too. And our sessions that we're starting, our studio sessions starting next week on Tuesday afternoons, will all be advertised there as well, and they're by donation.
Great. By the time this comes out, they'll be rolling.
They'll be running. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you both for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Been lovely to chat.
Right, Walsh here. If you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF of my first book on embodiment, which seems that people like. I sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment with people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check those out.